Hello and what is up, you guys? Welcome back to the Aussie Grid Girl podcast. I know it has been a little while since we did this. Couple of quick updates on my end for you guys before we start. The reason why it's been a little while since I updated the podcast and recorded another episode is because I've just moved house. As you can see behind me, over this side, I now only have one bookcase with lights on it rather than two. You will also notice that the lights today are orange. You can't really tell in this light, but they are orange. As you can see, my face is very orange. And I'm wearing my McLaren shirt because we are still celebrating the high of Lando Norris and his podium at Silverstone, which we are going to get to very shortly, but we've got two other races to talk about before that. We've also got something very big that's just happened in the last 12 hours or so, 24 hours to talk about, and that is the return of Daniel Ricciardo, who was announced last night he's going to be taking over for Nick de Vries for the rest of the season at AlphaTauri. Now, the AlphaTauri statement, or lack thereof, I feel really bad for Nick. They haven't really acknowledged the things that he's done for the team. They haven't thanked him in any way. I know in Friends Toss's statement there was like a tiny little thing at the bottom where they kind of said, you know, we wish Nick all the best. But it's a shame. I feel really bad for the kid. I do. He's only had 10 races to attempt to prove himself and hasn't done very well. To be fair, Yuki's not having the greatest season either, but I guess Yuki had a good season last year. And he also had Pierre around to guide him, which I'm sure would have helped a lot. But I do really feel sorry for Nick and the way that everything's gone down. Sorry, I've got my spare lens for my camera in my hand. I'm going to put it down so I stop playing with it. It's really upsetting for Nick, and the way that AlphaTauri have gone about it is it's quite upsetting. And I really hope they do issue some sort of statement, or they say something at Montreal next week. Not Montreal. They say something next week about at the Hungaroring about Nick's exit. But I feel like it's going to be very focused on Danny's return, which, don't get me wrong, I love Daniel Ricciardo. I'm Australian. He's our Aussie guy. Like, Oscar is also our Aussie guy, and talk about a little legend. Again, I'm going to talk about Silverstone last because it's the most recent race. We're going to talk about Canada first. That's why I said Montreal instead of Hungary, because I had Canada in my head because it's literally the first thing on my app that says Canada. So I know that, like, that's why it's in front of me, so I keep thinking of it. But I am very excited to see what Daniel does in the AlphaTauri. It's going to be interesting. I don't really know what they're expecting from him. They're still a mid to low card team. He did do his Pirelli test this week, which is apparently part of the reason that pushed them to put him in the car. However, I have kind of been thinking that it was going to happen anyway. Because when you think about it, the promotional material that Red Bull have done so far this season, none of it has involved Nick de Vries whatsoever, aside from goggle games. And that's an F1 thing rather than a Red Bull / AlphaTauri thing. Like, we had Daniel, Max, and Checo in Australia. We had Yuki and Max doing the monster trucks. We had Yuki and Daniel doing the mini boats in Miami. Then they had Daniel again with Max and Checo doing the little tiny boat, like RC control boats in Monaco. I went to say Montreal again. I had to catch myself. In Monaco, so, like, they haven't really included him in anything, although whether that's Nick's choice and he didn't want to be involved in stuff is a completely different story. But yeah, I'm very excited to have Daniel Ricciardo back. It's going to be a good rest of the season. It was going to be a good rest of the season anyway, let's be honest. But yeah, congratulations, Daniel Ricciardo. Welcome back. We missed you. And I did notice in the statement that they said that Danny is on loan to AlphaTauri for the rest of the season because he's still technically contracted at Red Bull as their third driver, reserve driver, which I'm not sure who that role goes to now. I'm assuming it would be Liam Lawson. However, I really don't know. I should have probably done a little bit more research before I jumped on and started talking. But that's the way that we do things here. We have fun. So we shall see what comes of it. And maybe this is sort of a test for Daniel to see how he goes in the AlphaTauri for the rest of the season, with the possibility of him replacing Perez at Red Bull next year. Now, Checo's contract does run until 2025, but as we've just seen with Red Bull, with the way that they've put Daniel in the car, We saw it with Max when he took over mid-season for Danny Kvyat. So they're pretty cutthroat there. So we'll see how they go. And it'll be interesting to see what they do eventually decide to do. I'm sure there is going to be some fun, silly season stuff that we can talk about after the Hungarian Grand Prix, because I think we have Hungary and then we have the summer break and then we've got Zandvoort after that. I could be wrong. We might have 2 races before. I think we have 2. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have 2. Hang on. Let me just look it up for a second. I keep looking at my laptop, by the way, guys, which is here, so I can see myself out of the corner of my eye talking to you. But my camera is on like an angle here, so I have to remember to look at you guys and not at the laptop. So I apologize if I do. So we've got Hungary and we've got Spa, and then we have the summer break, and then we've got Zandvoort after that. So in podcast terms, that is 2 weeks of racing in a row. I also have I'm going to a gig next. I'm going to a gig on Sunday, but that's fine because it's the week after. Ignore everything that I just said. So we've got Hungary and we've got Belgium, and then I'll record a podcast after that. It might be a couple of days delayed. Won't be as delayed as the gap between podcasts this time, but it will be a couple of days delayed, because fun fact about me, I'm a burlesque dancer, and I have my burlesque showcase the Sunday of Spa. So it's not going to clash, but hopefully I will be up and still awake and alive after dancing, that I will be able to record a podcast the morning after Spa, and hopefully I'll get that to you guys on the Wednesday. But back to the main topic at hand, we are going to talk about the last 3 Grand Prix that we have had. So we have had Canada, we have had the Red Bull Ring, we have had Silverstone. I believe, I can't remember the name of the track in Montreal. Is it Catalunya? Is that what Montreal is called? Or am I getting completely confused? Sorry, I've got my branding here, guys, my Red Bull branding. I know I'm wearing a McLaren shirt, but Red Bull, because we were talking about that. But anyway, we're going to talk about Canada first. So, the Canadian Grand Prix. I know people aren't going to believe me when they say this, but it does say this on my phone. You can't see it, and I'm not going to try and get my camera to focus on it. But it does say good start for Lewis, because it was a good start for Lewis for the start of the Canadian Grand Prix. He got off the line really well. And it's nice to see him doing well. I know people are going to be like, oh yeah, she's just saying that. I'm sorry, I'm not. It is nice to see Lewis has sort of managed to pull together after a disappointing couple of years at Mercedes. And then we had the battle between Lando, Oscar, and Nico Hülkenberg. Now, I think it would have been interesting to see what qualifying could have been, seeing as it did end early. It was a weird top 3 with Fernando, Max, and Nico. It was weird, but we do know that Nico Hülkenberg does well in the wet, so he probably would have been up there anyway. Probably not top 3, but he would have been up there. And then we had the virtual safety car because of Logan Sargent. I was so devastated for him. I hoped he was going to do so much better. I think I really want to see Logan do well this season, because I don't want to see him get dropped at the end of the year. And I know Will Buxton was talking about it on Twitter the other day, yesterday after everything that happened with Danny. But I don't want to see Logan go. It was just Canada that he was kind of disappointing for, because he sort of did pull his shit together for Silverstone anyway, and he drove really, really well. However, we're going to come back to that. And then we had the safety car, another one, because an actual safety car this time rather than a virtual safety car, because of George Russell. Now, poor George, again, I know you guys are going to be like, oh, she's just saying that, but poor George. He was doing quite well, and then, took the turn too wide, clipped the wall, and he was very lucky. My next note actually says George versus wall. He was very lucky not to rip the suspension off that car, the front of it, with the way that he came into the wall. Nearly knocked my Red Bull over. It was a shame for him, because, again, Canada was looking like it was going to be really good for George. And then, in saying that, though, to be fair, he did hit the wall and did sort of have his issues. And then he managed to kind of pull it back. I think he got himself back up to P6 or something before he had to retire the car, which was nice. So, I feel bad for George. I do. But it was, he did really well to bring the car back to where he got it back to before he was forced to retire it. And then we had it was a beautiful drive for Oscar in Canada. That's literally what my note says. It says, beautiful drive for Oscar. Now, that kid is probably there really is no question about it. Nick is going to get Rookie of the Year because really his only other competition is Logan. We've seen how Logan is going. And his only other competition would have been Nick DeVries, but we're not going to talk about that. I already talked about it, so we're not going to bring it up again. I will try not to mention it unless I have notes directly about Nick. I won't talk about it. She says I do have a note down here. Oh no, I feel really bad. Anyway, and then we had the safety car, and it was just what my literal note says: safety car - Ferrari WTAF, which means what the actual fudge. I never know what their strategies are going to be, and it genuinely stresses me out. Because it's hard being a Charles Leclerc fan and a Ferrari fan at the moment, because we could have had so much. We should have had so much better, and we're just not getting it. So hopefully they manage to get their crap together. I'm being very mindful of the fact that I swear when I do these podcasts because my dad picked me up on it. Thanks. Hi, Dad. I know you watch my podcasts. Everybody give a shout out to Darren in the comments. I'm sorry I swear so much. I will try to be better. Speaking of swearing, can we just talk about how nice Jean-Pierre Lambiase is, GP, Max's race engineer? I don't think he could be mean if he tried. That's what it says in my notes. I don't think he could be mean if he tried. Because I just don't think he could. He's genuinely quite... He's quite nice to Max when they're on the radio, even when Max is being his usual self and when he gets a little bit upset. GP is still so nice to him. I don't think he could be mean if he tried. And then I've written DeVries versus K-Mag. I'm sorry I said I was going to stop talking about Nick. I promise I won't talk about him anymore. There was that incident where they both kind of ended up having to take the escape road. It was entirely Nick's fault. K-Mag was kind of just a passenger along for that. And again, I was really upset about it because K-Mag was having a really good drive. And it just wasn't just didn't want to flow for him, which was upsetting. But, we do what we can. It is what it is. I actually wrote, we need to talk about Nick DeVries. But maybe let's not. Maybe let's not talk about it. We've talked about it enough at the start of this. I will try not to bring it up again. I'm sorry. Past Kelsey, you're a dick. Let's not talk about it. And then we had Crofty on commentary for Canada, and he was saying the classic Alex Albon defense, which he defined as keeping cars behind him however he can. Which is kind of accurate. That sort of is the classic Alex Albon defense, is keeping other cars behind him. I think there was a little bit of a DRS train kind of going on behind Alex. This is why I should record these podcasts straight after the races, because I genuinely don't remember most of the Canadian Grand Prix. This is why I have my notes. My notes don't really make a lot of sense when I don't write enough. But anyway, and then we had George's retirement, which, as I said, I did kind of call that was going to happen after the accident. He was very lucky not to rip the front suspension off the car when he came into the wall, but there wasn't really much he could do to save it, unfortunately. He did try his best. He did do, again, I'm very impressed. He did really well. Just some things sometimes just aren't meant to be, and George finishing the Grand Prix was apparently something that was not meant to be. But yeah, and then we had, I've written Max and his ha-ha on the radio. Now, again, this was the Canadian Grand Prix, which was many weeks ago, so I don't remember. I think what I was talking about was when Max took the curb and was like, I nearly took myself out there. When he took the curb and kind of went over it, and he was like, I nearly took myself out there, haha. It's just typical Max. He was so far ahead that he could just giggle, which was actually quite funny. And the note that I've written at the bottom is Ferrari actually made good calls, ? Why am I saying that? Why did I say Ferrari actually made good calls? Did we have a podium in Canada? I'm a really bad Ferrari fan. I don't remember. It was too long ago, you guys. I really need to write my results down on my phone so I know. No, we weren't on the podium. Oh, Charles was fourth. He was still a good 4.5 seconds behind Hamilton. But anyway, we did make good calls apparently because we had them in P4 and P5. Not as good as certain calls that were made in Austria, but, Austria was a sprint weekend, so it was always going to be a good weekend for Charles. He always does well. In saying that, if we do think about Canada, I'm pretty sure he and Perez were both out in Q1, which... To be fair, getting Charlotte back up to P4 was probably quite an achievement. But, yeah, just poor choices. Poor choices or a lack of smart choices or just a lack of choices in general. But, we do what we can. It is what it is. I know I'm looking at my laptop again, but that's because I'm checking my microphone. I'm hoping that my microphone is working. Hello! Okay, I'm seeing a little green bar. Hopefully it's all fine. I do talk quite loudly anyway. My ex-housemate used to complain quite a lot that I did talk quite loudly when I was recording. It's because I have a headset on usually and I can't hear anything. But I'm also just quite good at projecting my voice. I've been a performer for most of my life. So, and then we go back to Austria. Now, before I go into talking about specifics about the Austrian Grand Prix, all I'm going to say is track limits. Yeah. Track limits. Do I really need to say anything more, or is track limits enough? Now, do we think that the FIA and the stewards were too harsh on everybody for track limits, or do we think that they did the right thing by constantly picking them up for track limits and deleting laps, or do we think that track limits and penalties kind of just destroyed the race as a whole? I'm interested to hear what you guys think about that. Please let me know in the comments. Or you can tweet me, or you can message me on Instagram, or you can talk to me on Threads. We are going to talk about Threads in a second too. I think they went a little bit too far with the track limits. I think, consistency is a thing. I get it. They have to be, if people are doing the wrong thing, they need to be pulled up on it. But it did kind of get a little bit ridiculous. And in the end, track limits did really decide part of the race. Carlos Sainz should have finished P4, but because of penalties, Lando ended up finishing P4. Although Lando, with the McLaren updates in Austria, holy shit. I'm sorry, I knew I said I wasn't going to swear, but holy goddamn cow. The McLaren upgrades, guys. McLaren upgrades. We're not going to talk about Ferrari upgrades because they clearly didn't do anything, but McLaren upgrades. We had, in the sprint race, we had Lando versus Charles. He didn't qualify as well as I thought he was going to for the sprint race, Charles Leclerc. I think he was out in Q2. It was an early exit, I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. No, I'm pretty sure I'm right. But, yeah, him and Lando had a really great battle. Somebody posted about it on TikTok of when the boys were on Twitch together, and it was Charles saying to Lando, "We can be world champion," I said, and then him losing it and kind of yelling at Lando, being like, "Lando! But yeah, there was some really great battles in the sprint race between the two of them, and then during the race, the fighting between him and Carlos was super impressive. Sorry, there's a cat running around my feet. I think she's hungry. She needs to be fed in 15 minutes. It'll be fine. I'll do it when I finish recording. Before I go out. But yeah, Lando and the McLaren upgrades, hell to the yeah. We're going to talk about them more in a second because we're nearly at Silverstone. I think almost my whole, all of my notes pretty much were talking about the penalties. It says, Lando, track limits. Lando, talk to report every time Lewis goes off. He's doing it all over the place. I'm not going to talk the entire time. Lewis complaining about Checo after he got his 5-second penalty. Shut up, Lewis. And then it literally just says, Lando! I have a friend on Twitter that I've met through F1 Twitter, and literally our entire conversation on race weekends is just different variations of Lando, mostly all in capitals. That's our tweets to each other. So if you see those, that's what's happening. And then we've got Lewis, Carlos, Yuki ×2, incorrect 7, Checo, Alex, 5-second penalty. Lewis complaining again about Lando. And then there was, Toto having to get on the radio and kind of telling Lewis to calm down a little bit. I love it when Toto comes on the radio. I just love Toto Wolff. Like, I'm not a big Mercedes fan. I don't like Lewis. I don't like George. But I like Toto. He makes me happy. Lando, driver of the day, of course. That was always going to happen with how impressive he was. We also had Charles back on the podium in Austria in P2. Mostly, I don't want to say this, but a lot of that was to do with Carlos holding Checo behind him for a really long time. I don't think Checo would have caught Charles in the end, but he was also very much helped by Sainz and his ability to keep Checo behind him. And then I've also got back to talking about my penalties. Nick De Vries got a penalty, then he got another penalty. I'm sorry, Nick. Said I wasn't going to talk about it anymore. And then we had Pierre with a penalty, and then Logan with a penalty, K-Mag with a penalty. Post-race penalties, there was so many of them. I think Esteban Ocon ended up with 5 post-race penalties of 30 seconds or something, because of track limits. So again, it's a track limits thing. I think maybe there's an alternative way that they could be penalised, maybe monetarily. Although monetarily is not really going to affect them that much. But, there is other ways. Carlos did kind of amuse me a little bit when on the radio talking about Perez, saying that he was intimidating him. That's kind of the point, is it not? You want to intimidate your fellow drivers so that you can do better than them? Or is that just me, wanting to see a little bit of healthy competition and getting a little bit excited? But yeah, it was pretty amusing. Also pretty amusing was Max boxing on the second to last lap so he could get the fastest lap. And then after the race, there was also audio of him during his final lap, talking about how interesting it was watching the back markers when he was completing his final lap. He was on the radio to GP talking about it. It was a really good race, which was really refreshing. Aside from all of the penalties, it was quite an enjoyable, interesting race. In my opinion anyway, Austria was probably one of the most exciting Grand Prix we've had in a very long time, because there was so much going on. It was refreshing. I really enjoyed it. Again, I'd love to hear what you guys think. I think it was quite entertaining. Hungaroring is probably my third favourite race on the calendar. It goes Australia, Monaco, Red Bull Ring. I'm biased because I'm Australian, so that's always going to be one of my favourites. And then, Monaco, just because it's classic. I know a lot of people think that we shouldn't race there anymore, but it's Monaco. It's a classic race. I think we could probably do variations of the cars from Monaco so they're smaller, and it could be more competitive. But I do, it is one of my favourite races of the season. And then Austria, because Austria is always entertaining. Lando's always good in Austria, so I'm always happy to see Lando do well. Always happy to see Lando do well. Now we can finally talk about the weekend that we've just had in Silverstone. The reason why my makeup is the way that it is. Now, when I watched the race, I did one eye that was Ferrari, and one eye that was McLaren, which is what I've done today. And I also made the statement during the week of the following. If Charles Leclerc or Lando Norris end up at the podium at Silverstone, I will dye my hair. Now, I did tweet it, so it was in writing. I did post about it on my TikTok, and I talked about it on Instagram and on Facebook and on Twitter. If you don't follow me on Instagram and Twitter, you would have missed me talking about this. But I have to ante up because Lando ended up on the podium, which means I'm dyeing my hair red. I am booked in for the Thursday before the Hungarian Grand Prix to do that, so I will post photos of my hair on Instagram and on Twitter and on Threads, so you need to be following me. I will talk about all of my social media links at the end. And that's the thing that's happening. So let's be honest, I did have this discussion with my friends. I was going to do it anyway, but blaming F1 drivers for my poor life choices is a thing that I've been doing lately. Because if I blame it on them, then I can't take the full blame and other people can't blame me. I can blame it on them, which is fine. I'm sorry, Lando. I'm sorry, Charles. No pressure, you guys, for getting podiums and things like that. But if you do podium or you do drive well, I'm going to make poor decisions and it's going to be all your fault. Anyway, Silverstone. So, Silverstone qualifying. Can we talk about how bloody loud the cheers were from the crowd when Lando almost qualified P1? And then during the race as well, Lando led the first 4 laps. What the actual? First 4 laps. God damn it, Lando. And Max and Oscar being side by side as well. Like, again, talk about Rookie of the Year. God damn it, Oscar Piastri. And the fact that he qualified P3, like, clearly the McLaren upgrades are working. Oscar had the upgrades that Lando had in Austria, and Lando had the same updates, and I also think he had an updated front wing, and the nose of the McLaren was different for this race as well, but only on Lando's car. I could be wrong, but I think that's how it went. But clearly these McLaren upgrades are working. And Oscar was very unlucky to miss out on being on the podium. He was so close. It was just that second safety car that kind of screwed him. It was bad timing. I didn't actually write a lot for Silverstone because I was so engrossed and I was so happy. I was smiling the whole race because I was so proud of Lando. So proud. Sorry, my hands do weird things. But I've got a couple of notes, which is Lando with like 5 O's and then Oscar with like 6 R's. Ferrari making poor choices again, putting Charles on the hard tyres when he had a new set of mediums. I personally think, I'm not a strategist, what do I know? Personally think they should have put him on old soft tyres. We saw how well the soft tyres do light up to start with. Arthur Leclerc was in P3 for the F2 race beforehand. I was so devastated for him. I think he ended up being P9 because his tyres just went. But I think they should have put Charles on his used soft tyres after that first pit stop. Who was to know that we were going to get the second one? But I think it was always going to be, they were always going to make a second pit stop. So I think it would have made more sense to have those soft tyres and then put him back on those fresh mediums. Because he had 2 sets of mediums because he didn't do free practice 2 because the car was having issues. Which is also known as the Mattia Binotto curse, because Mattia was there on Friday, which is when Charles didn't run in FP2. But let's not blame let's not blame them. Hey, there was the safety car, K-Mag on fire, legitimately. That was scary. It's always scary when cars are on fire on the track. K-Mag had a really rough weekend. It would have been nice to see him do better as well. I just genuinely want to see the Haas boys do better. They sort of had a really good season to start off with. We had that really great battle between Lando and Nico in Australia. And then they've kind of been nowhere. Aside from, Nico being P3 or qualifying P3 for Montreal, they just haven't really done a whole lot, and it's really upsetting. I would love to see them do better. But anyway, I have all in like capitals, Alex, and then Charles, and then Alex bloody Albon. Alex drove fantastically. If Lando didn't get driver of the day, it was definitely going to go to Alex because he drove his heart out and absolutely smashed it. Like, Alex Albon is seriously underappreciated. If they don't even consider him to go back to Red Bull, I think they're making a huge mistake. As much as I would love to see new blood like Liam Lawson, there's some really, really good guys in the F2 at the moment, like Fred Vesti and Ollie Behrman. And as much as I would love to see those boys in Formula One, Ollie's only 18, so he's got a little bit of time to mature before he does move up to Formula One. If he does, he might go down a different path. I think he's going to be a really exciting driver to see in Formula One. Hopefully somebody picks him up as like a developmental driver. He's part of the Ferrari Academy at the moment. We also had in Silverstone in the F2 race, we had Jack Doohan on the podium, which was nice. It was nice to have an Australian up there considering we missed out because of the safety car and Lewis Hamilton in the Formula One race. It was there's something different about British Grand Prix fans and the British Grand Prix that just makes it so much more entertaining. Like, it was a really exciting race, and I was so proud and so happy for Lando and so proud of Oscar. Oscar Piastri, Rookie of the Year. He's going to go far. Now that we've got these upgrades in the McLarens, it'll be interesting to see how they go for the rest of the season. I'm really hoping that Oscar will end up with a podium finish at some point this year. I think he deserves it. He's an amazing driver, and now that McLaren has kind of finally caught up to the talent that is Lando and Oscar, who knows where they're going to go. It was really sweet post-race when Max got out of the car and went over and patted Lando on the head. It's quite sweet, the little bromance that they have. Like, they're best friends. Well, not best friends, but they're really good friends, and I think you can kind of tell, and it's really quite sweet. And then Pierre was doing so well, and then I also, wrote down, God damn it, Lance. Lance is dangerous. There is no better word for it. He's not quite as dangerous as Romain Grosjean was, but he is still kind of dangerous. The way that he came back on the track and took Pierre out ruined his front suspension and ruined his race. And he only got a 5-second penalty for that, and I think it was 1 penalty point on his super license. It might have been 2. I think it was 1. When Lewis took out Max in 2021, I think he earned himself a 10-second penalty. So it really should have been a 10-second because he took Pierre out of the race, and we had a double DNF for Alpine, which was also quite upsetting, especially when Esteban went out quite early in the race too. I think I don't usually watch all of the post-race stuff, but I watched a lot of the post-race stuff for Silverstone. And I was watching the cool-down room where Max and Lando... So Max went in first and he was sitting in Lando's chair. Let's just talk about that first. It's so cute. So Lando could have, the center chair and be the center of attention. It was quite sweet. And then they were saying in commentary, oh, Lando sat in the wrong chair. Lando didn't have a choice. Max was in his seat. He just sat in the available spot. So... there was that, and then, they were talking about being Oscar and Max being side by side at Cops, and Max was saying he was thinking to himself, don't oversteer, don't oversteer, don't oversteer, because he was concerned about doing what Oscar would have been done to him, which was quite sweet. Again, Max is not the villain here, guys. It is not his fault. Please stop blaming him and taking things out on him when it has nothing to do with him. Somehow, I saw online last night on Twitter that people were saying that it was Max's fault that Nick had been dropped from AlphaTauri. How do you figure that one? Max had nothing to do with it. He doesn't tell them who to hire and who to fire. Just because they're countrymen and they're friends in the first place and Max suggested Nick for that seat in the first place doesn't mean he genuinely has anything to do with it. Let's not blame Max. And I know that people are just going to get really, really mad at Daniel Ricciardo as well. I know there is a large majority of people that are really happy. But just remember, this has been a Red Bull and AlphaTauri decision. It wasn't Daniel's decision, and put yourself in his shoes. You definitely wouldn't have turned down the opportunity if it was offered to you. I know I personally would never turn down that sort of opportunity. If it was me, I would definitely take the seat because it's there. But yeah, let's enjoy the fact that we have Daniel Ricciardo back on the grid. We can be sad about the fact we missed him in Australia. And hopefully it means that he will have a seat next year and we will see him back on the grid full time next year as well as this year. As I said, it will be a couple of weeks before we record another episode. Hopefully it'll go up on the 3rd of August. And then when silly season starts over the summer break, because it's going to happen, that's usually when it happens, I will record another episode and we'll talk about it. Hopefully I'm going to have a guest with me for the next one. My lovely friend Pete was supposed to be here with me to record this podcast, but he is unwell, and then he went to Tasmania, so we missed out on recording a podcast episode together, but hopefully I will have him or someone else on with me soon. Thank you guys so much for listening and for hanging out with me again. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, if you want to find me on Instagram, my Instagram handle is... I actually have to look it up because I don't remember. I know, I'm terrible. I'm getting old, guys. I'm going to be 30 this year. My brain doesn't always work. But anyway, my Instagram handle is the Aussie Grid Girl, which is also my handle over on Threads. So you can follow me at the Aussie Grid Girl on Instagram and at the Aussie Grid Girl on Threads. Then you can also find me on Twitter at Kelsey_139. If you want to interact with me in any sort of way, my TikTok is Little Rockin' Emo. I did upload about 3 TikToks the other day during the Silverstone race because I was very excited. I don't usually upload content that much, but that's kind of just how it happened. And that's how you can find me on all of the social medias. Please come and interact with me. I love having people interact with me. I love chatting. I love hanging out with people. If you guys want to come on and be a guest, we can also always do something over Zoom. If you have any questions that you want to ask me, feel free. You can ask me those questions on Twitter. You can ask me on Threads. You can ask me on Instagram. You can ask me in the comment section below. Even just say hi so I know that you're here. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!